This is exciting. It's kind of a big debut for you.
Yeah, this is fun. This is cool. I can't see too many people. This is cool.
So I want to actually start by giving a little bit of background for the company, because you are a very new company. You were founded in 2017.
That's right.
So the focus is creating a massively shared real-world AR experience. You haven't really shown all that much so far. There is, however, right around the corner from here at SF MoMA, there's the Magritte Exhibit, and a couple weeks back, you guys showed something off there.
We did. I think we ran the single largest shared AR experience ever attempted. 150 people playing together in real time. So the kind of stuff you'd expect with an MMO online, but all happening a few blocks from here.
So let's actually start with the video, and you can actually walk us through what we're looking at here. I think we've got a little bit of that exhibit and some of what you guys have been working on.
Yeah, let's look at it. So I think what's going on there is, so that, as Brian was saying, that's a few blocks from here, and people are on their own phones looking around, and you're looking through the phone at other people interacting with the space. We had, I think, on the second floor that you're seeing there, this sort of large Minecraft-like game, and all of those blocks are people actually placing persistent AR blocks together or their own selfies on the ceiling. So you can go back and see those later. And then the idea is, over the last year, we've been working on other things like this, where you could either play with large numbers of people in a public space like the MoMA, or with your friends and family in private spaces like your living room or your dorm room or the office, in a public park on a weekend, or that's actually, I think, on Market Street. And the idea is to overlay one massively shared MMO universe on top of the real world that you can access with your phone.
So there are a couple of examples in that video that I want to point out that I think demonstrate this pretty well. One of them is right around here, kind of a Farmville experience.
Yeah.
So somebody walks into a park and plants a seed, and everybody else who's on that layer can kind of go and water and care for the plants.
Yeah, the idea is once you have a city mapped out, which is what we've been doing for the last year, you can fill it with all kinds of shared AR experiences. One of those is a large-scale cooperative game like Farmville, where unlike Farmville, where you used to have to go online and play with somebody who was around the world in some kind of virtual world, now I can put down a bunch of seed in a public park that somebody I might not even know is able to collaborate with me on and compete with me on, and enable these kinds of shared interactions that live in the real world in the places you hang out in.
It's tough, though, to really get that across when it's a video like that.
Yeah.
Especially with, and we've discussed this before, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that it is a very new company, that the graphics are kind of crude. I mean, they're big, they're polygons, and when you're just looking, inside a museum space and there's a bunch of blocks, it doesn't really come across in the way that it would in an actual AR experience.
Yeah, graphics are one of those things that improve very fast. And so when we're a small team, we're 30 of us. The thing that we really wanted to focus on was showing people that this is possible on your device today. You don't need to go spend like $2,000 getting a piece of equipment that sits on your table. You're going to pull out the phone you already have. And so you can either spend time sort of optimizing graphics performance, or you can spend time on the core stuff, which is computer vision and really hard to make stuff show up in a shared real-time manner. And so the reason it's not sort of photorealistic is because in our play test, we realized people actually didn't care about the graphics as much as they cared about people saying, when I'm placing a block in space in front of us, this has to show up in real time. And so you can either spend time working on that massive networking infrastructure or on graphics. So the graphics will get better very fast. And as you know, GPUs improve constantly. But the thing that's really powerful, and I find humans tend to be a lot more, index a lot more on is this actually mirroring my real-world interactions? So speed and accuracy of spatial coordination as opposed to graphics.
I mean, you've got a tough line to walk here. We've seen, at TechCrunch, we've seen so many super hyped companies never actually release something into the real world. So you've got to create the best user experience possible, but you also want to get something out the door. So what kind of timeline are we looking at right now for people out there to actually be able to experience this on a wide scale?
Well, that's the reason we put this in people's hands a few weeks ago, because, like, as you're saying, it can be a slippery slope to say, look, this new medium, AR, is new. Let's wait till it gets super perfect and polished before introducing it to people. Or you can just trust that humans will, learn, figure it out, and give you really great feedback, and then iterate on that. So there's a trick to finding sort of the sweet spot. So we did polish it a little bit before we put it in the hands of people at the MoMA. These were folks who'd never done AR before, 18 to 65-year-olds who'd never even played a massively multiplayer game, or even a game, and they just got it. And I think sometimes you just got to trust that users will figure it out and then give you feedback that you can iterate on.
But obviously the next step is having that on a massive scale.
Yeah.
Are you looking at can you give me anything? Is there any kind of specific timeline?
Oh, before the end of this year. We're rolling people out on a wait list that you can sign up for on our website. The thing to get right is making sure this works everywhere in the world, on any iOS, any Android device that you have. And so today it works on some of those devices that we're learning on, and the idea is to scale that out to everybody by the end of the year. So
really, really cross-platform.
Yeah.
Mobile devices, potentially maybe facial-worn hardware. It's in the cards for you guys?
It is. The idea is this is a software layer. It's an MMO layer that lives in software on top of the real world. As long as you have a camera and you have an IMU, we can position you and allow you to open up that world from whatever device you're on. So as long as you have those two things, and there are a ton of devices, including head-worn displays today, that have those two, you can have that shared AR experience. But you're right, cross-platform is the starting point, because there's no point of having a shared experience that I can't actually share with you just because you're on a different phone or different OS.
So speaking of super hyped companies, you were involved in Magic Leap in the early days. That said, you did go and start this company. What is it that they weren't giving you that you needed in your own startup?
I think the world changed, right? They started working on that problem pretty close to when the iPhone came out. And so if you're starting to work on this stuff, the first iPhone,
yeah.
right? So if you're starting to think about this stuff in 2009, like you said, as Mike said with Rainbows, with Minority Report, there's a science fiction novel that really inspired me and my co-founder, Rainbow's End.
I went to your office this week, and you have just a pile. You handed me a book.
It's like required reading, basically. And so if you start with that vision in 2009, it's totally conceivable that you got to build your own hardware. But in the intervening, sort of 8 or 9 years, the world has changed so much that you need a really good reason to not just use this as the compute unit for the starting point. And I think that's what made us pretty excited about starting this at Ubiquity6, was all the missing pieces have fallen into place where you can just give people this shared AR capability with the phone they already have, whereas 10 years ago that wasn't the case.
So the upside, obviously, is that everybody has this super computer in their pocket at this point. The downside is this really, is that a good experience for AR?
I think it's a starting point.
Yeah.
And I think we started the company eventually for this notion of ambient AR that lives in a very easy way, through glasses, through a visual medium that is constantly figuring out where you are and layering these AR experiences for you. But there's no reason you can't make hit a lot of valuable milestones along the way just with these, because there's 3 billion people walking around who do have problems or experiences that they want to be able to access without having to drop a ton of money on a new hardware device.
You want to give people, again, obviously you want to get it out the door, but you want to give people the best experience you can, because if somebody's first AR experience is terrible, there's a good chance they're not going to do it again. The first really mainstream AR or AR adjacent experience was Pokemon Go. That's when, at this point, to this day, when people think of AR, they think of Pokemon Go. Now, we've talked about this a bit. You said that is not really a proper AR experience, and I'm wondering if that is potentially a detriment to the industry.
So it depends on what timeline you're talking about. I think it was a fantastic starting point, right? Because it proved that 500 million people around the world wanted to be able to interact with digital things like characters they cared about in real-world locations. The thing people should not draw a conclusion about is this is where we stop.
Yeah.
Because as you're right, it wasn't a shared AR experience. If I was interacting with a digital character here, you were living in your own universe. So we were actually playing completely on our own. But that's not actually the way humans interact, right? When I'm talking to you right now, everything we're doing together is shared and responding to the same environment, the same reality. And so as long as people understand that stuff is going to move very fast, and I think this is why the laws of physics of software are very different, then the industry is fine. But I think it has been a while since people have seen an update to that experience, partly because the tools that were used to build that experience are quite old. They were built, the game engines that they were using and are using, whereas they started building those like 9 years ago. We're building our own authoring tools that are focused just on AR, work super fast, super well, allow you to prototype much, much faster for shared AR experiences, massive networking out of the box. It's not a next step. That's where you start off with, from a first principle.
So maybe a better way of phrasing it then is like, how do you not fall into the hype trap that VR fell into recently? I mean, there was a huge upswing, and as we were saying before, now there are all of these headsets sort of gathering dust in people's houses and offices.
Right. Well, step one is don't force them to buy hardware. Just let them use stuff with the device already in their pocket. And VR is very immersive because it is a hardware module, a hardware form factor that we haven't had so far. But I think AR is finally here. That's what I'm saying. It was conceivable if we were having this conversation 9 years ago, I wouldn't have a good answer for you than say, we just got to take the leap, and make sure.
Magic leap.
No pun intended. And force people to, early developers to drop a ton of money on this. And our belief was, no, you just got to start now. Acknowledge that people are walking around with supercomputers. Sure, it might not be, the kind of ambient AR experience that people, like science fiction talks about. But just give people who already are walking around with these very powerful compute devices capabilities that we can deliver via this computer vision stuff we're working on, and then go from there. Listen to what they want before you ask them to invest a ton of money in hardware.
You saw the new Snapchat spectacles.
I did.
It's very difficult to say.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think it's a very, very good indication of more to come in the next 12 to 24 months.
I mean, they're not AR hardware proper, right? It's head-worn cameras.
Yeah, that's the secret strategy, or the Trojan horse, right? Is how do you get enough sensors in people's hands at a cheap price point?
Or on their face.
Or on the face,
yeah.
Exactly. That sets them up for very immersive shared AR experiences, or any kind of AR experiences a year or 2 years from now. And the starting point is put a camera on people's faces that is figuring out where in the world they are to usefully deliver an experience they might want to play, whether that's a game, a location-based guide, indoor navigation. And really all you need for that is 2 rear-facing cameras, an IMU, which is gyroscope and an accelerometer, sending that to a device that's doing enough compute to give you useful feedback and that might be via audio, or it might prompt you via notification to say, hey, pull out your phone, there's an AR experience for you here.
Is there a disconnect there? I mean, you're recording it all here. Obviously, Google Glass, Magic Leap, all of these things have heads-up displays on them. So that's a one-to-one experience, right? This is collecting what you're seeing, and it's also projecting that information back at you.
Yeah, this is one of those problems that we fall into as like techies and engineers, where you're going, oh, what is the coolest thing that we can deliver using technology that we're inspired by science fiction, by, and visual AR is one of those starting points that people just kind of assume that's what AR is. But it turns out humans are very, very good at parsing audio. Like, audio is a very immersive, augmented way to augment your information and the way you navigate the physical world. When you're driving and you're getting turn-by-turn navigation, a lot of that information you're just parsing via audio. When we're on a phone call, you're in New York and I'm talking to you. You're actually, I'm talking to you, but your mental model is building visual images of what I'm talking about, and you're pretty immersed in what I'm saying if I'm a good communicator. So I think AR can be just audio and still be pretty immersive, as long as you have the visual feedback that's responding to the real-world space using cameras.
So obviously, Apple is getting very aggressive into the category. They made an acquisition pretty recently. And Mike, before he came up on stage, sort of teased the panel by mentioning these potential Apple glasses.
Right.
In your mind, what do they look like?
I don't think they look that different from the stuff you're seeing from Snapchat today. I think Apple's MO has always been try to make people excited about Apple products as fashion or luxury products. They're proud of the form factor. They did that with the AirPods. It took a while for them to get that. They weren't the first people to do Bluetooth earphones. But when they did it, you looked at those and said, those don't look that different from the kinds of headphones I'm already wearing. And I think
they're not the first to anything except for removing ports.
They're almost never the... Yes, exactly. If
they're always happy to lead the way on that one.
Well, yes, adapters are a good margin product. But I think with glasses, the luxury form factor that all of us expect from a pair of Oakleys or Ray-Bans is the closest you're going to get as a starting point. And I think the idea that you need a display, once you relax that, it's quite clear that there are already products on the market today that can put a pair of cameras and IMUs on your face with glasses that don't make you look super dorky.
So, I mean, in a sense, then, AirPods are kind of a stepping stone towards augmented reality audio?
Like, if with the limited information I have sitting outside Apple.
What do you know?
They had like NDA, the NDAs. So, I do think that like audio, the AirPods have been a sleeper hit from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
If you just look around, and I don't think San Francisco is always the best microcosm sort of for the rest of the world, but whether you go to New York, in many parts of Asia, Singapore, China, Shanghai, Bombay, like AirPods have been a pretty large-scale sort of sleeper hit for people who have that affordability. And then as you get larger and larger scale, prices drop. And I do think people will start to interact with AR first through audio before having to pull out a display.
In any sense, are Apple or Google competitors? Well, not with one another, but with you?
Oh, I see. No, without what they're doing, we wouldn't exist. Okay. Right? The idea is that AR, the idea of being able to figure out where a device is in the world, that's called local tracking, has been around for a while. A lot of people, actually, companies used to try to do that starting in 2011 or 12, once these IMUs got good enough. And then what Apple and Google really did was say, hey, this is a first-class citizen. We should have developers have high-quality APIs that they can call. They synced these IMU sensor outputs with the actual bare metal in a way that made the precision a lot higher. And so when we're able to do a shared space, that's because Apple and Google have taken a stance and increased the precision that these inputs have on your phone. So they do what's called local tracking, and we say, well, if Brian's over there and I'm over here, can we resolve that to a single global coordinate shared space so Brian and I can actually interact with each other? And we're only able to do that with the kind of quality that we have today because they've pushed the industry forward on device.
You're creating something that's kind of, I guess, akin to a browser, maybe is the best way to describe it, right?
Right.
So you're circumventing, or at least working on circumventing the idea of necessarily having any content partners create individual apps on the phone. Does that make it difficult? Obviously, every single company wants to develop their own app, right? They want, when you turn on your phone, to have their name on there and to have that controlled experience.
Right. I think it's akin to the internet, right? Which is that you have a website, and people are able to launch your website wherever they are, whenever they want. And physical space is very similar. I want an experience that's tied to this conference room or this venue when I'm here with you, without having to necessarily have to go through the process of setting up a whole new application just for that. And I do think AR starts to look more like layers, which are like websites you launch in spaces, than standalone apps. And I think that Apple is doing a lot and Google is doing a lot to make that easier. Mm-hmm. I think people aren't used to that consumer behavior yet, but the closest you've seen to that working in the wild is just websites.
So what, you just show them how cool the technology is, and then they jump on board?
Well, many times they're showing us, right? And I think this notion that AR is going to make all our lives more useful because you can finally bring physical spaces online is not new. And I think Apple and Google are great, like in that they do think quite ahead, Apple in particular, because the kinds of decisions they make to bring something to scale, like ARKit, usually take 2 or 3 years of planning. And so these are not new ideas. People, there's a pretty rich ecosystem of people giving feedback to each other. And I think when it comes out, as long as devs are able to do things they've already imagined without learning too much more tooling, then everyone ends up being net better off.
So they're going to kill me if we run over, so I'm going to ask you a very simple yes or no question.
Sure.
Is Ubiquity6 working on hardware?
Not today.
Okay. It could be in the stars?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, buddy.